complete.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Nico Bree, and in this video I will be going over step by step how I work my details into my models and how I apply the fusion method of detail. Also, I would like to mention before we get into the nitty gritty of the video, I have a tips video that shows how I manipulate the surfaces of my models to create the detail that you'll see throughout this model, as well as what plugins I typically use. I would like to also mention that the other tool I have fallen in love with recently and has improved my workflow is the Fredo joint push-pull tool, which allows you to push and pull surfaces in unique ways that otherwise you'd have to manually manipulate to achieve. I will leave the links to that and the link to the other tips video both in the video and in the video's description so you can find out more. Lastly, I want to put a disclaimer that the model demonstrations I will be using in this video are around 80 to 90% complete. So if you're tuning in to see a demonstration from scratch to finish, I do have several playlists as well as streams that cover those aspects of the modeling process. So without further ado, let's get to work. So in this video, we're going to cover what goes through my mind when I have a model at say around 70 to 80% complete, and I just really need to come over the final hurdles of the design. We'll also touch on what model real estate is and how I plan before I start placing asset details such as turrets, radar, missile launchers, and other details into the model. Okay, so here we have our 70 to 80% complete model, and we have a lot of space that could be used to detail and really flesh out this ship and make it unique to our universe. Now, this is actually the old Zakil model before I did the revamp, which is shown here. I'm going to be making a lot of comparisons between these two models and their different detail states. So bear with me if you may not understand one part, but know that I will explain it and show it in the other model to kind of help you understand what I mean. So the final hurdle for this Zakil model is going to be to fill up the rest of this real estate with either outside assets or just more built-in custom detail to our style. So in my universe, I like to use Rcs Thrusters because I really like that realistic aspect in space travel, and it really just adds a really cool dynamic to my spacecraft. So with that in mind, let's look at our model and the real estate that we have available to place our Rcs Thrusters. So we know in space there's no gravity, so we're gonna have to essentially have maneuvering thrusters that control every direction that our ship is gonna go. So up, down, side to side, and then we also want some thrusters to help articulate our ship in a way to be able to point our main cannons and just overall give it more degrees of freedom of movement. So first off, we want to be able to slow our ship down. So we want some forward-facing Rcs thrusters. So here I just essentially took this face, I offset it, and then using the vector push-pull tool, I was able to select this face and push and pull the detail in any way I want to. And in this case, I made the Rcs thruster housing by pushing it inwards. So with the other reaction control thrusters, basically what I did was I created an octagon and I offset it. Then using one of my favorite tips that I actually talked about in one of my other videos is I pull this surface up and down using the Alt key. And when I do, it drags all of the surrounding geometry down with it. And I just basically copied this detail and rotated it so I can have the Rcs thrusters facing the directions that I want them to. Now, for this section here, these RCS thrusters help the ship essentially target and aim our main cannon. So with that, we still want some added maneuverability, so we're going to add some more RCS thrusters near the rear here, and I basically just copied that octagonal shape and I placed it in the locations on the ship that makes sense. So I have some here, and then here, and then of course on top, and then mirrored on the bottom as well. So there is one detail that we want on our ship, and you can see that still here. I didn't do too much as far as the maneuvering engines, as far as changes go, but you do see the actual assets in-house and placed in the model. So now that we have our RCS thrusters down, what else do we want to add? We still have a lot of real estate to play around with, add details, and just make our ship look good. So for my frigates, I really like the idea of having hangars and fighter crafts and drop ships and stuff like that being able to launch and drop from the various hangars. So hangars is our next detail. And of course, this is all really Halo inspired as far as, you know, like the kind of side hanger protrusions here. So I basically drew out this detail here, and then using inspiration from futuristic hangars that I've seen from concept art, and then of course these were inspired by Halo. I used the same tooltip before to push and pull this detail out, therefore making the hangers. And then I typically use groups, and I just add the detail that I want to the group. You can use components if you want in SketchUp. Really, I don't think it really matters. The only difference is the added effect with components is they are edited across the whole model. So wherever that component is, if you edit one of these, for instance, if this was a component, then it would modify all of them. That's the only difference. I typically don't like using components for, actually I don't have a really good reason. I think it's just based out of habit, really. But we have our 4 hangars, and then the detail around it, I like the hanger light, so I just went ahead, made some rectangles and pushed, pulled, extruded, and made the detail. Then using the in painting tool, the built-in painting tool, English, I was able to paint these details red. Now, these hangars were only for fighters. I wanted also a hangar for, you know, drop ships or shuttles. So I have this hangar here, which essentially is a larger version of the small hangars on the sides. And I added that to the bottom. And then for good measure, I added one also to the rear. So there we have it. We have our hangars done as well. And on the remodel, of course, the hangars also didn't change much at all. They are, yeah, they're pretty much the same. So the only difference is that I actually extended and modified this piece here where the fighter hangars are. So if you were to actually bring this over, You can kind of see the shape difference here. And the reason I did this was because this angle here for the hangar bay piece was kind of sharp, and with kind of like sharpness and like direct kind of detail, I don't think it settles on the eye right. So I decided to kind of flesh out that aspect a little bit, and though it doesn't look like it has a lot of difference, though it doesn't seem like it has a lot of detail or seem very different than the other one, aside from just flattening out that kind of sharp curve, it definitely helps soothe the eyes and soothe the flow of this particular
Next topic of discussion is going to be turret placement and scaling. So first, I want to go ahead and point out that between these two models, one very noticeable difference, aside from the added details on the smaller scale, is the turret scaling. And you can see on the old Zakil model, these are basically my turret hard points, if you will, that I've drawn into the hull. And for the smaller point defense cannons, they are in high number pretty much throughout the ship. And when I compared the Zakil model to some of my other models in my design library, I noticed that the turret sizes were completely off. And that's a point that I want to emphasize when you are thinking of where you're going to place your turrets and other assets in the model, is how are you scaling your detail? Because that determines ultimately how much detail you're going to put in and around the assets when you place them onto your model. So for instance, with the smaller turrets here, they come in high number, so I don't have to put as much focus on some of the other detail, because the turrets are going to kind of capture your eye when you're looking across the ship as a whole. However, now with the updated scale, this is still the case, but as you can see, the turrets on the side here are gone, but they're supplemented by a larger turret, as well as overall more detail added in this general section of the ship, albeit the kind of the same format, same structure and stuff like that. So there isn't much of a deviation between the two models, but simply because I added this simple scale here, it just still adds that kind of full and worked on effect, if you will. And if you notice here, this turret there isn't even a hard point for this size turret on the old Zakil model, and that's because it actually used to be this hard point here. And I didn't end up deleting the old energy cannons on the bottom here, so you can actually see that this cannon here, done morphed myself in the ship here. Here we go. Come on. Set us free. There we go. That small turret, in comparison to our large one here, you can tell that the scale is completely off. So, yeah. And then you also have to think, with turrets that small, are they really going to do a lot of damage to a ship of this size, or a ship larger, for instance? You know, this is like shooting pea shooters compared to, you know, an actual like 5.56 or 7.62, you know what I'm saying, on an AR. So there's a lot of emphasis that you want to put on the scaling to make sure you capture the right aspects for your model. And when I was thinking of where I'm going to place my turrets, always kind of factor in what kind of combat situations the ship is going to be in. So I want to make sure that I can cover all areas of the ship. So I want to cover the bow, the stern, port and starboard, and make sure that it can cover itself on all of those sides. And that is the reason why I placed turrets here facing forward, and then on the bottom facing forward, as well as on the side, which gives it kind of like this cool kind of angled attack that it can conduct, and then more on the front here. And then we have a turret on the side here, and then on the rear sides at different angles, and then on the rear on flat surfaces. And then of course we have our missile launchers, which are kind of all over, and they're different sizes for different occasions. So going into how I work my turret detail, one thing that you'll notice about my turrets is that I usually include a kind of base platform that looks extremely similar to the kind of hard point detail that I have in the old Zakiel. And typically what I'll do is I will take this and select one of the handles midway through the base, and I'll bring it down, and then I'll select the surface and I'll right click, intersect faces, and then with model, and that will create an outline for the turret. And from there I can offset it, and then I can pull or push the detail around it to kind of add this built-on effect where the turret is going to be placed. And you know, it adds the, like I said, the built-on effect. So it's not like you're just slapping the turret onto the surface all willy-nilly and, you know, calling it a day. You know, you want it to kind of look alive, have that kind of mechanical built-in kind of dynamic, so your ship just pops more. And the same goes for like the missile launchers. You know, I did essentially the same concept with the maneuvering engines here with the missile launcher, where, you know, I made like a kind of octagonal or hexagonal type shape. Actually, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So yeah, an octagonal shape. And using the Alt key, you know, I'm able to pull and push the surface, and then of course I offset it, and, you know, I push and pull the detail again, making this kind of depth kind of feeling to the launcher points. And then the launchers themselves, I got inspiration from like vertical launch missiles that are on like US Navy destroyers, and then also different VLS systems in like Sci-Fi. I just took that inspiration and I made the launch tubes for the missiles. For the point defense cannons, I took inspiration from the close-in weapon systems that are on our U.S. carriers today, as well as destroyers and other naval ships. And they also took a little bit of inspiration from The Expanse. I just really like the whole idea of, rapid fire cannons that can take out any incoming threats with quick ease and like high tracking. And then for the energy turret, this one was a bit tricky, and really it comes down to how you want your turrets to look and how you want them to function, because I took inspiration from just a variety of sources. I just looked up energy cannons online, and I just saw little minute details here and there that looked really cool, and I'm like, let me just incorporate that into my own style. And eventually I came up with this style turret, and that is one of the variants of my energy turrets. And that is essentially how I come up with my weapons and detail them and then place them into my model.
The next aspect of detail that we want to add to our model is just like miscellaneous details. And this is really just subjective to your style, kind of like I mentioned with the turrets as well. For me, I like adding like mineral containers or like industrial type details that kind of feed into the backstory and like the capabilities of the frigate. So in this case, I have like this orange colored container, which is kind of acting like a storage location for the various materials needed for like the 3D printers and repair shops and stuff for my spacecraft. And for you, it may be shield emitters, or maybe like piping or different armor types that are added to your ship and stuff of that nature. So anything miscellaneous that you can think of that fits your style. Finished adding our assets to our model. We've added some background detail, some filler detail for like our turret bases, and we've added our maneuvering engines, our hangars, our missile systems, engines, whatever other assets that we can import. We've imported them. But for instance, on this model, we still have a lot of real estate left. After we've placed our turrets and stuff, our hangars, everything else. So what else can we add? This is actually the part where you really test your mettle of your detailing, and then you have to figure out if you're going to go the fusion method, the greeble method, or the texture based method. Because at this point in time, if for instance I wanted to do a more texture base, you wouldn't want to have this drawn geometry on the surface, because essentially a texture would fill in all this detail. For me, since I like the fusion method, I use the in-program painting tools, as well as just the regular drawing tools, the offset tools, and I go in and I add, like for instance, these structural ribbing type details where I just draw lines across the axis and make sure that they're angled properly. And for those who may not know, you can select line and then hover over another line that is at a particular angle, and SketchUp will, using the pink line, will match the angle, so you can either continue on that angle, or you can just
match it until a certain point, in which case you can also hover over a certain point and you can drag it at that angle until you get to the point that you want, and bam. So instead of using a texture base, you can do methods like this. And then, like I said, using the paint tools, you can paint this detail a different color. So if you're using like a render program, or you want to make the details pop and catch the eye, you can paint them different colors, and that aids in the ship's overall look. Now, another tool or tip that I suggest is, of course, using the offset tool and the push and pull tool, and honestly, trusting your eyes in this case as well. Because, for instance, how I determine where I place, like, for instance, a structural ribbing, or maybe like an armor plate kind of design, or better yet, like these little indent kind of colored areas, which I'm going to get into here in a moment. When I look at my model, I think, okay, there's some detail here, and then there may be like a blank space here. And as you're skimming through and you see that blank space, you kind of tend to focus on it a little bit. You're like, why isn't there something there? It's not consistent. It's not flowing with the rest of the model. So, like, for instance, over here, if I didn't have this feature here, then it would be kind of bland up until this next maneuvering engine, and then this kind of greeble detail here. So the way that I kind of add to the consistency and flow of this particular area is I love using formation lights for my spacecraft. So if you previously thought they were windows, correct you now, they're not. They are formation lights, which, for those who don't know, formation lights are like these green, I believe they're solar powered, or solar absorbing material, which glow in the dark when military fighter craft are flying in formation, so it helps them from crashing into each other during night operations. Well, in space, I thought that would be a pretty cool idea to keep ships from colliding into each other, since space is relatively dark. So I add these formation details, and as simple as just drawing a rectangle, extruding it, push pulling it, and then, like I said, using the paint tools, you paint it whatever color that you would like your formation lights. For me, it's like this sea green kind of color, because that is exactly the same color that actual military fighter craft use when they're in formation. And essentially, I just rinse and repeat this technique throughout my model, and where it makes sense. If my eye catches something that is kind of awkward, or it just kind of looks kind of weird to me, then I'll kind of add some detail to it, or I'll do something with it. Now, I do want to give a warning about this, because sometimes you can fall into this trap of, you see a spot on your model and you add some detail to it, and next thing you know, now your eye, instead of focusing on the new detail that you added, excuse me, now you kind of created like this other void kind of nearby because of the detail that you added. And it's kind of like this endless loop, essentially.
You add a little bit more detail, then more real estate kind of opens up. And next thing you know, you're scaling your detail down so much that other aspects of your model start to kind of become inconsistent. And then you have to apply that detail throughout the rest of the model. And then you realize, oh, I've added more detail in one area trying to match the consistency of the previous area. And it's a never ending loop and you never finish your model. So you want to be sure that you're scaling your detail appropriately. For instance, here I added this kind of ribbed structure that kind of symbolizes like this layered hull kind of giveaway with the hull. And by doing this, I kind of made sure that when I'm doing the detail down here, I scale it appropriately to be around the same size as this detail here, so it doesn't distract from the flow of the model. And the same goes for here. And then when I add the missile launcher bays here, and then I add this detail here, which are like these like structural supports that kind of build up this aspect of the ship. And then for the hole in the back here, you know, I add like this kind of array detail to fill in this kind of this area. And then I use the formation lights as well down here to make sure they have coverage on the bottom of the ship as far as the formation lights and stuff like that. So that is essentially how I detail my models and the mindset that I have when I'm working through. So I really hope that you guys enjoyed this 3-episode series. And let me know in the comments if you want me to go a little bit more deeper into what I've covered. I feel like I've kind of delved into my mindset and how I really do things. The rest of it really is just a matter of working in SketchUp until you are fluent in your own style. And I keep emphasizing that because I feel like sometimes people want me to kind of walk step by step on every little piece, but I don't want you to come at the process by copying me until, you know, you're essentially just a carbon copy of my detail style. I would like you to kind of flesh out your own style by using these detail examples in your own way. So, like I said, I hope that you really enjoyed this. If you did, please subscribe, like, share this tutorial series. Let me know how I can improve on some of these. This is really kind of my first series where I really go this in depth of like my own psyche when it comes to this. So yeah, again, I really hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.